This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel
Joel?
with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Hey, it's another episode of Play-by-Playcast. Thanks as always for the subscribe, stream, download, however you're listening to us here on a Friday morning. My name is Joel Godet. This is the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. It's a professional development podcast. We dive into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, preparations of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. You can, as always, find the podcast on social media at PXPcast. I am at Joel Godet, JoelGodett, or you can shoot me an email, jgodett at bsu.edu. So that's jgodet at bsu for Ball State University. .edu. Our guest today is one of the true titans and giants of the play-by-play broadcasting industry, and we'll get into his backstory and the introduction into his appearance in this episode here in just a little bit. But his name is Bill Mercer, and he was the very first voice of the Texas Rangers and the voice of the Dallas Cowboys, and spent some time in the booth with Harry Carey with the Chicago White Sox and much more. But we'll get into Bill Mercer here in just a second. Quick aside, if you're a fan of the podcast, which obviously you hit play, so we're halfway there. We're actually going to we're taking the pod on the road. Can we say that? Is that a thing? We're not doing like a live podcast taping, but I will be at the National Sports Media Association convention awards weekend down in Winston-Salem, North Carolina at the end of the month. It comes up, the awards dinner is Monday the 25th, and then there's a seminar that day as well. And as part of that seminar, many esteemed broadcasters are speaking. Kevin Harlan will be there, Wes Durham, last week's guest on the podcast, which is available in the archives if you'd like to go listen. Wes Durham will be there. Howie Deneroff from Westwood One will be there. Tom Bowman from Learfield will be there. Like a whole bunch of people that are very important. I will also be there speaking about podcasting because I have this one, which is kind of like having a toddler speak about the toy industry because he has a Power Rangers figure. But at the same time, I'm kind of looking forward to the opportunity. I've been doing a lot of legwork and kind of diving into the podcasting world so I can give kind of the most well-rounded picture possible. But looking forward to seeing any of you out there listening. If you are going to that National Sports Media Association convention, weekend, awards weekend is what it is. Convention just sounds very official. But looking forward to seeing you guys there. If you were at the seminar, come on by and see us for our podcast chat on that Monday afternoon. Anyway, now into the summertime, which for me as a broadcaster, kind of a downtime. Like I come home from work now and I have time. Like I make dinner and I can go to bed at a reasonable hour. And like if people ask me to do things socially, I can go. I went to Topgolf yesterday for the first time, which is like bowling but golf. But it's also a great opportunity for me over the summer. I look at it kind of as like my professional development time. It's just a time to do different things, explore different things, try different things. I in the past, I've made tapes. I've gone to Indiana Fever games just to work on some things I wanted to work on. I decided that here in 2018, and a lot of it comes from just doing this podcast and just hearing how people have dedicated themselves to the craft in their own careers. One of the things I decided in 2018 was that I was going to become a better master of the English language. I think I'm decent at it right now. I was always like an English and history guy. Math and science were not my thing. And I fancied myself a decent writer. but I wanted to be able to just have a more command of language, more command of idioms, more command of sayings, more command of slang, just be able to really play with language a little bit more in kind of a Doc Emmerich fashion. I feel like when you get to Stanley Cup time, that comes out in broadcasters because everybody starts like charting how many things Doc Emmerich says that are just amazing, and they tweet them, and then you're like, wow, I am so far behind. So I've actually decided this summer I'm gonna master English a little bit better than I have it now. And I actually went to Barnes & Noble. I went to a bookstore. They still exist. I bought a combo dictionary and thesaurus. And yes, for pleasure, I am going to read the dictionary this summer. How closely, we'll find out. But I just kind of wanted to have. I didn't own a dictionary. I just kind of wanted to be able to flip through it and just see what kind of words struck me and how I could use them differently. And it's one thing to do it on the internet, but just to have a physical copy and just be able to flip through and see what popped into my head. I haven't gotten to that part of it yet, but I also did go to the public library here in Noblesville, Indiana. I also still go to those quite frequently. I keep the library in business. Has to be. Like, I never return a book on time. Ever. I think since I've lived in Indiana, I've probably paid the library like $50 in overdue fees. And it's like 25 cents a day, people. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Anytime I owe you something, you're probably not getting it on time. But I checked out some books that I thought would help. And the one I'm working through right now is 1,100 words you need to know. And I'm just kind of flipping through it and seeing what piques my interest and what different words that, I'll be honest, I don't know, and which ones I can apply into a broadcast setting that don't get too over people's heads, because that's obviously not what we want to do, but just different ways to be more creatively descriptive. I also got a book called Word Workout, Building a Muscular Vocabulary in 10 Easy Steps. This thing's like 1,000 pages, so I don't know how we're going to get through this. But it just kind of gives you a whole bunch of different words and backstories on them and kind of how they're used, which I thought was cool. And then I got the American Dictionary of Slang, the Topical Dictionary of Americanisms, just to see if I can talk the way the kids are talking in some respects. Although I don't know what year this was published, so it might have been like the way the kids are talking, a la New Kids on the Block. So that's my personal growth project here this summer. We'll see how that goes. I guess I will keep you posted on it as we go through the summer months here on the podcast, and then we'll see what kind of results it lends once we get to football season. You know what really got me thinking about it? It's been on my mind for a while, but the Jesse Goldberg-Strassler episode, and I have to purchase the Football Thesaurus. When we were talking about language with Jesse and his writing of the Baseball Thesaurus and the Football Thesaurus, that's one of the things that really got my mind churning a little bit, is not just understanding the sports that we broadcast, but the languages that are inherent to those games. So that's my project for the summer. Quick aside to start things off. If you want to get involved on social media, hit us up at PXPcast. Be curious to know if you're in an off season right now, or even if you're in season, types of things you're doing or types of things you do to keep yourself moving forward as a broadcaster each and every day. Hit us up, let us know, at PXPcast, or myself at Joel Godet. All right, enough of the pleasantries. On to today's guest, who is Bill Mercer. And as I said off the top, a titan, a legend in this business in a lot of different ways. And, it's funny. The first question I asked Bill was how he would characterize his career to someone who did not know him. Because it's really hard to do succinctly. Like, you can attack Bill Mercer's career from so many different angles. Like, he did so many different things well over a really long period of time. And I mean, this goes back to he was on television reporting on the Kennedy assassination. KRLD, 1963. Wrote a book about it. He and some of his colleagues, when the news went live. Check it out at the public library. Just make sure you return it on time. But here's a guy who was the inaugural voice of the Texas Rangers, who also was on television talking about the Kennedy assassination. Think about the versatility in those two things alone. But also spent a long time in his career in minor league baseball. He also, as I mentioned, worked with Harry Carey with the Chicago White Sox. He was the voice of the Dallas Cowboys, where he interacted, we will talk about this, with a very young Vern Lundquist. He was the voice of North Texas for a long time, the Mean Green, where he would later go on to teach. And we'll touch on this. One of his kind of greatest accomplishments in broadcasting is not so much what he did, but the legacy he left with those he taught. And they have a name that is quite particular. We will get to that in the podcast as well. And a lot of the members of that group are people that you will know, and people that have been on this podcast as well. So his legacy, as great as he is as a broadcaster, might even be those people that he has helped churn out and that will carry his name on tacitly or overtly. Big words there. Tacitly or overtly over the course of their careers. One other thing that Bill Mercer did that is of interest to me, and probably some of you out there, we had Rich Bikini on the podcast a couple weeks ago from Major League Wrestling and formerly WWE. But Bill Mercer was the voice of world-class championship wrestling on television. I mean, that's going way back. This is like pre-WWE, when wrestling was much different. Like it was treated by fans and those in the industry as real. You know, now there's the acknowledgement of the fact that what we're watching is predetermined and nobody's taking a chair shot to the head. That was not the case when Bill Mercer was the voice of world-class championship wrestling back in the 1980s. When he was the broadcaster for the Von Erichs and the Fabulous Freebirds and Bruiser Brody and Ric Flair, some of the giants of professional wrestling back in those early days of what has developed into what we know today. So here's a guy who has covered Major League sports at the highest level, professional wrestling at the highest level, news at the highest level. He's done it all. Has taught and churned out his successors at the highest level, and is a guy that I was excited and honored to have on the podcast. So as I said, where do we start? How does he explain his career that covered so much ground to people that don't know who he would be? Bill Mercer is our guest here on Play-by-Playcast this week.
None of these things I really started out to do, except hopefully be a play-by-play announcer for football. That was what I was thinking about when I got back from the war and went to college. I thought, well, I'll just do football someplace. I wasn't very up on that you do football, but you have to have another job or you have to work for the radio station. No, I didn't expect a lot of this because I was never thinking of it. Let me give you the background of how this all started. As I may have told you, when I was a kid, I had listened to the radio with my dad and listening to play-by-play because we listened to sports most of the time, he and I. And I told him one time when I was, 10, that I thought I could do that. And he laughed and said, well, maybe you could, but it was just something that was it's kind of, I guess you want to be a doctor, you feel that all the time or something. Then I got a game, a little spinner game, baseball game. I was living on a small farm in the summer, so I didn't have much social life. And I just did play-by-play of these games of my local Class C Western Association baseball team, the Muskogee Giants. And I it was my interpretation of play-by-play, so no telling how it sounded. But that was the early induction into this. And then went through high school and kind of let it pass and went in the Navy and in World War II and came back home and, I was going to college and I thought, well, what am I going to do? Well, I'd like to do play-by-play, but I also suddenly, for the first time, after I guess I matured somewhat, was in my first play in college and was fairly successful. And I wrote for the school newspaper, which I'd really never done before. All of a sudden, I'm doing these things like somebody pushed a buzzer and said, this is what you're doing, this is what you're doing. And the guy that really pushed the buzzer was my first grade professor, Prof. Robinson, James Robinson at Northeastern State College in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. The man was unbelievable on helping and seeing and preparing you for things. I got into debate, and I had never thought about debate in high school because I started being a debater. This one man opened the door to a lot of things for me. Not the acting. The acting came because I just suddenly thought it'd be fun. So that was a background of stuff that I learned in this little college. And then I went to Denver University, and they had a so-called radio station on those wireless things into the dormitories. And I decided, okay, I'm going to do, they weren't doing any sports. So I said, let's do football. And I did football, and then I did basketball. This takes a little while to explain, but then I graduated and had a job as a news director at a station north of Denver. That didn't last particularly long, and I don't know why. Maybe I wasn't good enough or whatever, but that year was rather lost in my ability to be a broadcaster. And I came back to my hometown, and my dear wife was decided to get a job teaching. She was a teacher. She had teaching ability. And she called me from the superintendent's office and said, there's a job for a broadcaster, a sports broadcaster in the station downtown. So I went down and got the job, convincing the poor general manager that I knew a lot, even though I couldn't show him anything. and that's where it started. And then after that football season, the other station in town called me and said, we'd like for you to come over and do football, basketball, baseball, minor league baseball, the same team I did when I was 10 years old, and boxing. Boxing was really big in that time. So that was it. Now, you mentioned wrestling in the introduction. That was another thing that somebody pushed a button. After I'd been over at this other station, KMUS in Muskogee, it was a good little station then. About a week later, they said, oh, by the way, every month we do a broadcast of professional wrestling from the civic auditorium. And I said, for gosh sakes, I've never seen wrestling. I saw a little bit on television one time. I didn't know a thing about it. And they said, oh, go down there and talk to the promoter. And so I went down there, and a couple of the wrestlers happened to be in town, and I told them what my predicament. And so they told me the various holes, and I wrote it down on a legal pad, and I would check my legal pad to see which one was going when I first started this stuff. And so there I was into wrestling, and enjoyed it because, I was doing radio, so I could do whatever I wanted to with it. And 3 years later, I got a call from KRLD in Dallas. They said, we understand you're a really good wrestling announcer.
It's like, buddy, you have no idea. Yeah.
No, I have no idea if I am or not. A friend of mine had gone through Dallas and talked to them and said they needed a wrestling announcer, and he said, oh, I know the best one you could hire. So that works out. I got hired, and I figured, well, I'm doing a lot of sports here, but Dallas is a huge town compared to Muskogee, and it's got to be a lot better. So I went down there, and that's where everything then began to fall in place. That was the time in '53 when all the networks were drying up, radio networks, and the stations were trying to figure out what to fill. So KRLD decided to do some high school football and got Highland Park, which was a more prestigious school in town. And that helped because I became friendly with a lot of people that can help you. Then they decided they were going to do baseball, which they'd never done before. So I was there and I recreated and broadcast live baseball for the Dallas Fort Worth Rangers and then the Dallas Rangers. This was minor league, AAA. And that went on from 1959 through 1971. And then the major league team came in. So that was I had a lot of years broadcasting baseball and football. The Dallas Cowboys and the Dallas Texans came to town. And we had the Dallas Texans at KRLD, so I broadcast that with Charlie Jones, who became a major league broadcaster. And then the Cowboys in 1965, they asked me to do color, and the next year in '66, I started doing play-by-play. So all that, with the background of all I had done to prepare for all this, worked out well because that I had improved as going along, doing also University of North Texas I was doing at the same time. So some weekends, I had a high school game on Friday, a college game on Saturday, and the Dallas Texans on Sunday, which was quite a schedule. I was never at home. But that preparation, if you're doing it and you're doing it well enough to stay there, I guess it's okay. But I found a quote today. I was reading the paper. There's a plumbing company called Benjamin Franklin. Mm-hmm. And old Benjamin said, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And I can attest to anybody who's want to do this business that doing the game is just the end of a long series of preparation. When I had the Cowboy games, I worked on those games every night of the week. And you put in 3 or 4 hours for every game, college, high school, no matter what, you've got to get all the information. You have to pull it in. So preparing is the most important part of this, because then you have all this in your mind or on some paper, which you can do. Now today it's a lot easier than it was then because you've got the computers and all the information. We didn't have that then, so it was a lot harder to put all this, find the information, put it all together. But I'm not, patting myself on the back. It's just the fact that preparation is the key to being a really good broadcaster, or I guess anything else. So that's the background. And wrestling. I did wrestling live when I came to Dallas in the first place, and at the Sportatorium, which became an infamous icon of Dallas, and kind of did that right along. And then the most important one was World Class Championship Wrestling. The last years, that was when the Von Erichs were in power, and that program that we devised just took off and all over the world. It was just amazing. But it was a different kind of wrestling show and a more personal and various things. So that was the last one. But I still get people who remember me for the wrestling and don't remember me for the Cowboys.
I was going to say, there was that, I saw the quote you had that, like, at one point in time, you were the 4th most popular person on television in Israel behind the Von Erichs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, behind the Von Erichs. And I never got to go to Israel. The Von Erichs did. But anyway, and I met an Israeli lady some years ago at a signing for wrestling pictures. She came over. She had from Israel, and she came down from some town. She heard I was there, and she had always listened to the shows or watched them. And it was so great to find somebody that it was one of those who made that possible in Israel. But it's always great to find people who really either admire you or don't admire you.
What was it like kind of having a foothold in the wrestling side of broadcasting as well? Because I think, and even today, although it's changed in a lot of respects, people still look at it as less than because of it's pre-scripted, or they'll say it's fake, et cetera, et cetera. But particularly back in the world-class days, the kind of era of kayfabe was still alive, and it was portrayed as real. And I mean, before I sat down to talk to you, I went back on the network, and I was watching some of the old, Von Erichs and Flair stuff, and it comes across, and it was presented very much like an actual fight.
That's right.
What was different about broadcasting wrestling, and what did you get out of broadcasting wrestling that you maybe didn't get from broadcasting, more traditional sports, so to speak?
Well, I think I would take it the opposite way. What I took into broadcasting wrestling was the same thing I did broadcasting a football or baseball. Well, not baseball, but a regular athletic event. I knew that it was the decision between the two wrestlers had already been decided, and in fact, they wanted me to come into the get together before the wrestling matches and talk about this and that. And I said, no. I don't want to know what time this is going to happen or what's going to happen. I want to react to it as though, I didn't know when this decision was made to end the match. So I just broadcasted much like I did any other sport. There are parts of wrestling, and I think the main part that people probably know is that the winner is determined. And considering what wrestling people think, that winner is determined because of the next wrestling match that they might want him to be wrestling the champion, and that really draws a big crowd. But as far as the basics of wrestling, it's a rough, tough, hard event, terribly hard on the individuals. Accidents happen in the ring. I recall we were World Class got so big, we went out to the Cotton Bowl and broadcast out there. And one of the wrestlers was wrestling Kevin Von Erich, and he picked up a metal chair, and somehow the timing got off, and he really splattered Kevin's head, and his blood was running down right onto my table where I was sitting broadcasting. So those things happen, and that's real blood. Now, if you look at some of the wrestlers like Flair or one of those, his forehead would probably look like a map. Yeah. With all the scratches across, and either with a hard thumbnail or with a tiny bit of metal put in a bandage on your finger, you can cut that forehead easily. So there was the real blood, and there was as they call it, the fake blood, which was still real blood, but it came differently. And throwing guys around and all that, I saw guys break their arms and all sorts of things, because it is a very difficult and terribly hard sport. Accidents, the timing and everything is so intense. But I decided I'm not gonna make any differentiation from being a sportscaster. I'll just do the best I can of giving it that same feel and that same I've lost the word.
Same feel.
Timing that you have in other sports. That was my idea.
What was the of all the things you've obviously broadcast, you've seen a lot of iconic moments, a lot of iconic matchups. But when you think back, even though the determined outcome was already determined ahead of time, what was the Von Erichs versus the Freebirds like, and how did that compare to other things that you had been able to see over the course of 50 years?
Those were, I'd never seen much anything quite like those things. And they were so talented, the three of them, six of them, the three Von Erichs and the three of the Freebirds, that it was always a surprise to me and how they could do all this and still keep going. I mean, they were just continually, battling each other, knocking each other around, and it was really a succession of great events whenever they pulled together. I guess David Von Erich was the most impressive, even though he didn't look like a wrestler. He was tall and kind of thin, but he was the mastermind of those three guys. And when he died, some of the power of the Von Erichs left. I mean, it was just like it shut down a part of the whole scene. And things went from bad to worse then in their wrestling era.
Sure.
And ended so tragically. So there was an era of about 6 years, and then it was all gone. And that was the pathetic part of the whole thing.
What was it like learning about that stuff? Even from back at the beginning, when you talked about sitting down and them walking you through all the holds and walking in as the broadcaster that's asking these guys to tell you and teach you kind of what they're doing so that you can go out and do your job.
Well, it was I had to trust them, and as I learned those holes, then it's like the preparation. I was prepared for whatever was coming, and I knew the hole so well it became second instinct. So that came along, and there are not so many holes that you can't remember them. I mean, there's just each guy has some sort of favorite hole. But the thing that really improved in wrestling was when I started. It was they had these best 2 out of 3 fall things, and those went on interminably. And they decided that was it, and guys would rest with a hold. They'd rest because they went so darn long. So they'd get a hold on and rest on the floor for a minute or two, and they did away with that, and that really improved the speed and the enjoyment of wrestling. They just had figured it out in one fall, and that was it. So it changed the whole aspect of it, and that's speeded up the game, speeded up everything. When we devised World Class, the new video cameras were coming out, becoming better and better. They used the old studio cameras on wrestling up to that point, and that meant you had one studio camera on the floor and one up higher, and that's all you could get. You got a medium shot and a wide shot, medium shot, wide shot. That was it. You couldn't get tight shots. You couldn't get really. So when we devised WCCW, it was the idea of the engineers or the cameraman with the camera on their shoulder on the side of the ring, which the wrestlers got upset about that at first, and then they realized that it didn't make any difference. The tight shots made them look great, so that was a hurdle we passed. But that was when the intensity and the speed of the wrestling and the Von Erichs really took hold, because nobody'd seen that before. Even McMahon admitted that we were far ahead of anybody with this new production technique.
And now that's how it's done. You kind of take it for granted. That's what it is every week now.
Yeah, it's all the time now. And with all the other, I don't watch it, but every now and then I do happen to pass by, and there's a lot of explosions going on. So we didn't have explosions.
Yeah, a little bit of a different time now.
Yeah.
I know your heart was always in baseball though, and that was always your kind of first love in broadcasting, if I've got that right.
Yeah, that's right.
What was it about baseball broadcasting and the art and the craft of it and that sport that attracted you so?
I think because the players are more lifelike. There are people standing out there at second and third and in the outfield waiting for something to happen. And that's kind of like what we do, sitting around during the day. We were waiting for something to happen. And all that fits together. And it's the hardest, I think it's the hardest sport to broadcast because there is that waiting, that standing. And in on that, you have to build the interest or remind people of the scene because you've got the thing constantly changing. I used to be amused at my students when they would say, well, it's baseball and nothing happens. And I said, well, then you haven't watched the baseball game because there's always something happening. Somebody's moving over in defense at second base or shortstop. Today we have that move of all the players moving over in the right side on the left-handed batter, which I hope they stop. That's ridiculous. But the game is such a personal thing to me. I mean, every kid can visualize himself being a baseball player. It's pretty hard to visualize sometimes being a football player, but some can, of course. But it's just every little detail that you're pointing out and describing for that viewer, that one person that's listening to you, you're just telling her or him what the count is, what the situation is. There are runners at second and third and one out, and the score and how it's going to a base hit would do this and a fly ball would do that. And I mean, it's always you know the game and you know what could happen and what might happen, and then maybe it doesn't happen, and then you're not aware of anything going on, and all of a sudden everything happens. It's just that kind of situation. It constantly keeps you on your toes because you've got to react very quickly. Like I was watching last night, line drive off the pitcher's leg. They had the defense set up just right for a double play, but the shortstop was pulled out of position as he went to second, and the ball, which caromed off the pitcher, went into left field and a 2-run base hit. Yeah, but this is all the craziness of football, the wonderful thing of baseball. I mean, that in any level of it, from kids who are playing, that all sorts of funny things can happen. My granddaughter is broadcasting A-ball at Lexington, Kentucky. And A-ball kids, these are 19 years old, some of them. There's an old saying, in baseball. Well, it goes back to Bull Durham. You throw the ball, you catch the ball, you hit the ball. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and then it rains. Well, the first two things of that, throw the ball and catch the ball, are very difficult in A-ball.
That's true.
But then the Yankees made 5 errors the other day. So that's the reason baseball is so much fun. A-ball kids have a hard time throwing from A to B, and then they hear the Yankees make 5 errors in a game, and they look like the A-ball players. But it's just a crazy thing of the bounce of the ball or whatever happens. And that's what, football is pretty, I love football. And I really, really enjoyed broadcasting the Cowboys and all that, but it's pretty well laid out. It's kind of like on a graph, and it can be an exciting change of the game. An interception turns it around, he runs for a touchdown. But baseball you got to wait for that. For every play could be something different, and every game you see something that you've never seen before. That's the old saying in baseball. Does that sound like I like baseball?
Yeah, just a little bit. We had Jesse Goldberg-Strassler on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, who does the Lansing Lugnuts now, and every year he does a recreation broadcast to kind of keep that idea alive. And I know you used to do those back when they were, a necessity as opposed to a novelty. Beyond the obvious difference of being at the stadium and physically being able to see what is happening and being in a studio, what was different for you about broadcasting live and in a recreation, and how did broadcasting a recreation then maybe better inform you when you were actually sitting in front of a game and you had your eyes as a resource?
That's a good question, because I started doing recreations in Muskogee when I was first up there broadcasting. And I had heard Gordon McClendon and those guys, and I knew they were recreating the games. For some reason, I'd found that out. But the question you said, paying attention and recreating a game, I always figured that I had to time it. I couldn't speed up the game. I couldn't slow down the game. I had to try to time it just like a regular game. And that was how long between pitches and everything else. Now, the thing that I think is important there, to me, it was that I would see this in my mind, reading off a piece of paper, what was happening. And then I was keeping score just like a game. But I had to pay very strict attention that I didn't get ahead of myself, that I didn't hurry things too much, because you could hurry a base hit with run scored. So it was a discipline of seeing the game in your mind and calling it just like you would a regular game. I think, as you said, sometimes when watching a real game, I may have gained the idea of holding back a little bit. Don't try to speed up. Don't try to get ahead of the play. Follow the play and finish the play. And that's what I had to do in recreation. You had to follow the play and then finish the play. A runner at second base. Here's the pitch. A line drive to right field. That's a base hit. Rounding third. Heading for the plate is Jones. Smith picks up the ball in center field to throw to the plate. Jones comes in, slides. He's safe. And that sort of thing. And you try to time that exactly like you would see it. Because when you go out and see it, you remember, hey, don't hurry. Make each part of that play stand out. The ball is hit. It's a base hit. The runner's rounding into third. The center fielder, he picks up the ball here. And now you may be a little behind the play. That's okay. Here comes the throw. It's right at the plate. The runner slides. He's safe, and or he's out. And that's the timing of it that was so important in recreation. It was funny because I thought people knew that I was not on the road. I thought, well, at Muskogee particularly, we didn't have much. We just had a little cut of crowd noise. And I did get the schedule of the trains going by, and we did have train noises. So at 8:55, the MK&T Daily would go by the ballpark or something. Well, we had that, but that was all we had. We didn't have. I hit a pencil against a stock of wood for a hit. We didn't have that kind of technical information. But I found out one night, and I'll tell this story quickly. A friend of my dad's saw me at the grocery store, and it was the evening I was supposed to be like in Joplin, Missouri. And he said, "Well, you're going to fly up there." And I said, "I don't go. I recreate it." "Yeah, I hear you. All that. I know you'll probably just fly up there." I said, "Yeah, I guess I'll fly up there." So that night, a lady gets hit in the head with a foul ball. and evidently badly hit. And there was a lot of activity. And I had told my engineer, well, this happened. And I said, she's going to get hit, and I'll just have to talk about it a while. So she's hit, and I'm talking about it. And all of a sudden, he finds the recording of an ambulance arriving. And here comes the ambulance in. Now I've got to adjust my thinking that, which I didn't know he was going to have. Now that, and this really happened, they took her out in an ambulance, but I didn't think he had any sound effects. So we put her on the stretcher and took her out, and then he had the ambulance leaving. Well, that's pretty indicative of we're there, right? And the next time I saw my friend, he said, "I heard that ambulance." I said, "Yeah, that was quite a night." So we didn't try to make it confuse or make the people be that we were really there. We just tried to make a little sound that helped to go along with the game, and it got better as the years went along. And we had.
I heard you had a fighter plane once.
Pardon?
I heard you had a fighter plane once.
Somebody told you that, did it? Yeah, we were at WFA in Dallas, the radio station then. Charlie Jones and I, in 1965, the year they opened the new stadium out at Arlington, Turnpike Stadium. And that's when you had carts, and we had all sorts of sound effects. And this engineer was really into it. He had all sorts of effects that he pulled off and made. So we're out at El Paso, and there was the flight pattern came right over the ballpark down to the El Paso airport. Then they have a downtown ball club down. So we're going along during the game, and various planes are taking off, airliners, bombers, everything, with not just one right after another, but about every other inning, some plane takes off. And then we're going along, and all of a sudden, he hits the wrong cart, and a fighter plane is diving on us. And fortunately, it did not shoot its machine guns. It just came right, down like that. And both of us looked up as we were talking about this. And Charlie said, "I'm going to turn that guy into the FAA." And I said, "Yeah, we should, because that's dangerous, diving on a ballpark." So, that's a part of baseball. Something you don't expect happens. And that was what we didn't expect. But yeah, recreation was fun. I talked to my granddaughter about it, because they don't do all the out-of-town games. And I said, I'll help you with that, because I have a little bit of background in it, but they don't plan to do that. But I'm glad that I heard about Goldberg. Is that his name?
Yes.
Yeah. She said that somebody she knew about was recreating at least one game a year. And it really is fun. And I'll give you one more recreation and let this go. But
sure.
At KRLD, when we started doing, that's where I started doing baseball. We had to do recreations there in Dallas. And we were in Louisville, Kentucky, or someplace, or anyway, Indianapolis, the AAA teams. And we were supposed to start pick up the game, it was a doubleheader. We were supposed to pick up the game at 3:30 or sometime. And the game was supposed to start at 1, and they didn't want to carry the whole game. So that was fine. We were going to do part of one game and then the rest of the other. Well, the team playing got caught somewhere in a storm, and they had to wait a while. And by the time they got the game started, it was the time that we were going to pick up the game. So at 3:30, they started broadcasting, and I started recreating this doubleheader. When we finished that night, I did 29 innings. 29 innings of recreation. There was no food. Of course, it was on a holiday weekend. There was nobody in the station. I think I had a Coke and a candy bar about 3 times. Excuse me. And by 29 innings, I was a zombie walking out of that place. You know, that's 3 games, 3 games or more, and that's when you really wish you could see the people, because by that time you're seeing little people running around the table.
You might be drawing them yourselves at that point.
Yeah, it was really a great test. And when you don't play with it, when you're just preparing it, as Benjamin Franklin says, prepare for it and do it, it really is a great satisfaction, especially if you can do it in the same time frame. I would always check the paper the next day to see how fast the game ran. If we ran 250 and they ran 250, I felt, okay, they're right on target.
Let me go to the prep thing, because you've brought up the Ben Franklin line a couple of times, and it's always something we talk about on this podcast. So tell me from your perspective, and obviously this spans a lot of time, but how you prepare and how you have found over the course of a career you've prepared best, and how your preparation has changed in that time to suit you or to set you up in the best possible situation.
I don't think I had the advantage of using computers much, and that is really a tremendous value for you. I've written 2 books, and the computer and the internet are just wonderful in refreshing your mind and getting facts. These people today have a tremendous amount of I'll just give you the plan. When I did the Cowboy games and when I did football, the first thing I did was I made my own spotting boards. They were primitive, but they worked. And the spotting board is put the offensive line and the offensive players at the top of the board and the defensive guys at the bottom. That was my way of doing it. Others have put defense on the other side. Anyway, but you have to have the spotting board with the numbers and the names, because you can't remember everybody. But I try to memorize and be at least associated with the numbers and the names of all the offensive skill players, like the wide receivers and the tight end, running backs, and of course the quarterback. So I worked on that spotting board, and every week I had to make a new opponent for the Cowboy game. And then on the Cowboy game, I had to go back over the statistics that I wrote down by the player and how much yardage gained and what was the average. And I put a little that down, new statistics every week. So that took an evening. That took a day. Then I would go down and listen to the broadcast of the team that we were going to play that week. I'd listen to that, see if we had one, and listen to their players and listen to how that worked out. Then I got the statistics and went over that, and as I said, made little notes on the spotting board so that I could put those in that. And this took each evening, the statistics for both teams, the background, the biographies. I've read all the biographies of the players and made notes on that, where I could write it up on the spotting board. So starting on Monday, I worked all the way through Thursday. And at the same time, then I had a college game on Saturday, so I had to work on that one. That was all the preparation, finding the stats that go with the players and the team, associating myself with the other team as well as I could with the Cowboys. I remember a game where I was really thought that's where preparation stands out. Somebody, Meredith or somebody, threw a pass, and it was intercepted, and immediately I identified the guy just like that, you know. And which made that preparation, or I hit the name right on the spotting board, because I had a spotter, and that helped. But to do that instantaneously when the play is interrupted by an interception, and to get that name right then, it was really a part of thinking, boy, you really prepared for this well.
How has what you had to do back then? I guess what's held true to that today? And now we all have the internet today, and it gives us so much more, but it also gives us a way to be lazy, for lack of a better way of putting it. And that you don't have to talk to people, and you can limit certain things. But how has all of what you used to do back then held true today, and how much of it should people do more of today to make them better?
Well, you're getting into my my anguish of broadcasters. I won't even mention television. I was watching. I will, because it really bothers me. I was watching a very major league. I mean, these were two top teams in major leagues, and the three guys in a booth. Occasionally, they would tell you what the ball and strike count was. Occasionally, they'd tell you how many outs there were. Occasionally, and if something happened with a base hit, they would interrupt their discussions of the great things they'd done in baseball, or people they knew at baseball, or great opportunities in they were just mostly talking about what they had done and what they had seen. Okay, that's great. That's good over a beer, but not when you're broadcasting a game. There's every intensity of this thing, and I sat there and I thought, my God, this, even on television, I don't know the names of all the players. I can't see the ball and strike count put up in that little box in the corner. I can't remember it. I'd like to know where, they would show the runners at first and second, but they never talked about that. And what the situation was with runners at first and second, with the score. Not talking about that. They're talking about the great days that they had and people they know, that stuff. So now that I've gotten that out of my system. And the same thing is true in basketball. The best two guys on basketball are Jay Shulman and Billis, his color guy. Those two, once in a while, they'll deviate and tell a story and go over a line a little bit. But they stay with the game. They're not trying to sell themselves or because I know all this. It's because I played this, because I've done that. That was one of these guys on the baseball thing the other day. Well, I was a catcher, and I know about this. And boy, that's right. And he has to do. And I thought, okay, do that when he's catcher, but don't, anyhow. But Billis and Shulman are the best on basketball. My old friend and former color announcer, Vern Lundquist, was one of the best while he was still broadcasting, and he stayed with the game. That's what I think is so important. Stay with the game. That's what you're doing. You're trying to tell people who are watching who those people are, keeping up with the score, keeping up with the motion, the time, and this. And they don't seem to, I guess it's because they have so much information that they can talk about so many different things, or they're supposed to do that because maybe the game isn't that important to them. Now that I have that off my mind, what gets me is the fact that I think a lot of play-by-play announcers forget one thing. You are the conduit of sending information to the person listening or the person watching. You are the guy who has to, particularly on radio, who else is going to tell them what's happening unless you do? And you are not the star of the broadcast. The game is. And what you describe with each play, with each individual play, with each detail that you can throw into it. One of the hard things to do in baseball is keep telling the score. The half inning may run for 20 minutes, but you've got to keep giving the score after every batter or before every batter, because people want to know the score. The biggest complaint I had was one time I was on a talk show, and I was in Chicago then, and the talk show was in Dallas. And this guy called in and said, "Hey, you remember such and such game?" And I said, "No, not really." He said, "Well, I was driving from El Paso to Dallas, and that's 600 miles, and you never gave the damn score." And I thought, wow, I never gave the score in a 600-mile broadcast. But that's the little things that people listen to. And the pronunciation of the players' names just right. And boy, today it's a real challenge with all the Hispanic and the other names that are in them, which made it even stronger. But, on football, I'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. The ball is on this Dallas 35-yard line. You're moving from left to right in the stadium. That's from my left to your right and my right. Cowboys come up the line of scrimmage. It's 1st and 10 on their own 35-yard line. No score. We're early in the first quarter. Meredith looks over the defense. Renfro is wide right. Reeves wide left as receivers. Meredith looks, drops back, and throws a pass out the left flat. It's complete to Jones at the 35 of the 40. He's up to the 45 and the 50 and down there, and that's the first down. It's 1st and 10 for the Cowboys now on their own 45-yard line. There's no score in the game. Now, that's very simple, but you have to do that over and over and over. They don't set – I listen to radio broadcasts. They don't set the players anymore. Of course, they got this hurry-up offense. You can't do it very well. But I always told my students, you give the score after every first down, every change of possession, every time they score, you give the score. And every time the other team punts, or you punt and the other team takes the ball, then it's the score again. So you have the score is the biggest thing. Individually, you have prepared and you know the players, both teams in football, so you should be able to quickly identify the receiver on both teams. That's all the people want. They want the score and the picture that you're painting to be very accurate and intense and in detail so that they can see the game just as well as you can. When I was wondering if my life was worth what I was doing in Dallas when I started out, I was doing baseball, minor leagues, and I got a letter from a kid, a young man, who said, I listen to your games when you're on the road, and it really is great because I can see all the action, the way you describe it. And then when I come to Burnett Field, I can see the game even though I'm blind. Now, that's the greatest compliment I ever had in my life. If you could see the game, and he is listening to radio, and I told my class, I said, everybody's blind on radio. This kid was double blind. He was blind himself, and then he was listening to radio. But you broadcast it in clarity and in description and detail, and he can see the game in his mind. He was like recreating it. You see the game in your mind as you broadcast it. And that's what I think they ought to think about. Don't think about yourself. If you're a really good broadcaster, that's going to come through. You're going to get fame. But think of the listener. Think of that one-on-one that you have to tell that lady who knows nothing about the players or anything, but she's listening to the game, and she can see it because you're describing it so well.
You mentioned
go ahead.
You mentioned Vern in there in all of that. There's a couple things you said I want to touch on. But as a quick aside, can you describe for me what a 1960s Vern Lundquist was like?
My daughter's here and she's laughing. Vern was a free spirit. He was great. I had Blackie Sherritt as my color announcer in the 3 years before Vern showed up with the Cowboys. And Vern was just a great free spirit, but at the same time, he really paid attention to the game. So he was a good color announcer, and he picked up on these things. We had been to a function in San Francisco, and Vern smoked, and we walked out of the building, and he had been smoking, and pretty soon I looked over, and his pocket was smoking. And he had put his cigarette in his pocket.
Seems like a bad plan.
Well, it was a bad idea. One other story. We were in Cleveland in the old stadium, that had the open end to the lake. And it was winter. And it was cold. We were sitting on, and we had to go up on top of this roof in this little aluminum booth and look down on the field, which wasn't a bad view, but it was high, and the wind was blowing in, and I had on an overcoat, a suit, a hat, and gloves. And Vern was a little late getting up. We weren't on the air yet. But here comes Vern in a sport coat. And I said, "You're going to freeze." "Oh, I couldn't." I said, "Where's your coat?" "I don't know. I left it someplace." So those were two stories I'll tell about Vern. I really love working with him. He's a tremendous guy, and I say he was a little forgetful sometimes, young about things. But those two stories. We were at the Super Bowl in '72 in that old stadium in New Orleans, and somehow we did something, and a piece of the window fell down in the crowd. And he said, "Well, we've done it now. We're going to have to fight our way out of New Orleans." And I looked down and waved to the crowd and apologized, and he's laughing. But, it was, and one other thing. I'm sorry, you get Vern, I got it.
No, you're good.
We were in San Francisco, and loved to go to Kezar Stadium. That was the old stadium there. Yeah. And he'd go down and do a post game, with us all the time, every game. And that was really good. So he'd leave a little early. So he left, and it was a tremendous game and really exciting game. So I finish up and I do all the timing that I think is necessary for him. And then I say, and I don't know if he's there or not. You can't tell. "Okay, Vern, you take it down in the clubhouse. How are things going with the Cowboys?" And there's no sound. The engineer shakes his head. There's no sound. And I said, "Well, evidently Vern's having a little trouble. They're probably celebrating." So I interviewed everybody that walked by the booth, and I kept throwing it to Vern, and he never showed up. What happened, and it wasn't his fault, but he had the microphone and the amplifier down there against the wall, and they had thrown all their big cases to put their uniforms in and everything over in that corner, and he couldn't get underneath there to get to the microphone. So we didn't have a post-game show that day. Certainly wasn't Vern's fault, but he felt badly about it. But it was always fun with him. And as I said, he was a tremendous color man, and he willed himself and worked so darn hard to become one of the better play-by-play broadcasters in the country. And I salute him for that. That he did a tremendous job, and I miss him on basketball. So that's Vern.
You mentioned the Super Bowl in there, and I want to go back a little before that if I can. And this will be an ironic question because we just talked about baseball recreation. But one of the things that I was taught very early on in broadcasting was that you can't broadcast a game you're not at, so you have to have the windows open.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Tell me about the Ice Bowl. Were the windows open, or was that one of those ones where you just figured you'd get by with them closed?
Well, you're so right. It was around 20 below zero when we arrived at the stadium that day. It was 35 below zero that morning or that night when that storm came in. So Blackie Sherritt, who was another wonderful color announcer, he knew exactly the timing. He knew exactly what to say, and he said it so well. But we go up to the stadium, and I had forgotten my gloves, which was really a devastating sort of thing. But it's cold, and there was no heat or if there was any, it was overcome by the cold in the press box. It wasn't a very big press box. We had 2 windows in the front of our booth, and I tried to open the windows, and they were frozen shut. It's probably just as well because, the wind was blowing, but it was blowing behind us, so it would have been okay to open them, but it would not have helped our condition. But yeah, we couldn't open the windows, and they were standing in there with the engineer and the spotter for Green Bay and 2 of us, and all of a sudden we noticed that the windows are icing up, and this is a real problem because the ice is getting thick and it's hard to see. And not anticipating that, I didn't even think about it before the game. So the spotter said, "Well, I'll go across the street to the service station and I'll bring you back some de-icer. He said, I'll be right back." Well, 30 minutes later, he comes in looking like he's been frozen to death, and with 3 cans of de-icer, and we used it all during the game to keep the ice off the windows so we could see. It was that kind of course, the coffee froze. Nobody had coffee, nobody had food. And Blackie and I talked about it before the game, and we said, this is terrible, but let's don't dwell on it. Let's just give the temperature occasionally and the condition that we can see on the field, and not say, oh boy, it's so cold, we have no coffee, we're really in tough trouble up here. Don't talk about ourselves, just do the game. And so that's what we did. It was really a very good game that played, and the Cowboys had the lead on that last drive, but the last drive was a beautiful Bart Starr production, and of course they won the game. But it was one of the most interesting events I've ever been in, and it's still, every year it's reenacted. It's played. The game is played. I have a copy of it, and it was tragic that anybody had to lose it. Meredith thought he had said on the plane, and I was sitting right behind him. He was in tears, and that he'd lost the game. He'd lost the game. And guys came over and said, "You didn't lose the game," and everybody. It was just that kind of situation, but. They came back in 72. They did the Super Bowl and did it up grand.
I always think about that one because we played a football game here at Ball State. I think it was 2 years ago, and it wasn't even that cold. I mean, it's not even in comparison, but it was like 30 degrees out, and it was a wind chill of in the 20s.
That's cold.
And our color guy looked at me and he goes, "You're not going to open that window, are you?" And I was like, "Of course we're going to open the window." And I thought he was going to quit before the game started.
Yeah.
But we made it through. So I was.
There is a feeling about the window open, and the crowd situation filters up, and you're in the game. Inside a booth with the windows closed, you're not in the game really. You're in a studio looking at it, and I just read in the paper one of the networks is not going to Russia to cover the World Soccer situation. They're going to do it off television in the studio, and You
It's
just
different.
can't see all the game that way.
Yeah, it's different.
But they're saving money.
Yeah.
And okay, that's the way you want to do it. Fine.
Let me ask you about teaching too, because I've read a lot that is kind of, as much as we've talked about all of the different things you've done in your career, that is a lot of ways the highlight of what you've been able to do. How much does the Mercer Mafia mean to you all these years later?
I've got about 40 sons and daughters out there who I just love. And we just had a little reunion, and 22 or 3 showed up. Some from the very beginning of the time when we put the radio station on the air at KNTU. They came all the way from the West Coast. I mean, this was just a little reunion that I thought of having the guys get together. We had Tex-Mex food, of course, from Texas, and sat around and told stories and talked about it, everything. But it was so great to see these people I haven't seen in such a long time, and to find out what they've been doing. Most of them still kind of associated with broadcasting. And one guy's been in one place. I think he's the longest one that got out of school before the rest of them. And he's been in the same place for, it must be 40 years or 45, 50 years. So it was just wonderful. And I keep in touch with some of them. I just got a message today from Dave Barnett.
Yeah.
And he said, I just want to let you know that this is the day when one of the professors at North Texas had found out that they needed a person at KRLD, and he told Dave, and Dave got the job and worked with Brad Sham, who was at the station then. And that was the beginning of his 40 years in this business. And Dave was one of those, when he came to class in one of my early classes after in the 70s, and he turned in a tape, and I thought, what the heck do I teach this kid? I mean, he just had it down. It was natural. And I would find all sorts of things to give him a critique to make the page run a while. But he was a wonderful student, a wonderful young man, and still is. And thank goodness he's back at North Texas now after the 40 years and broadcasting for the university. But yeah, teaching turns out to be, I think, the probably, importance is not, the importance of my broadcasting was I enjoyed it, I did it, and it was what I'd earned my livelihood for my wife and 4 kids. And then teaching came along after I'd been through everything. And teaching those guys as well as we could, and they're practicing, was just wonderful. That was a time of little tape recorders.
Yeah.
Yeah. And excuse me, one of the requirements was after the first week, after I gave them the fundamentals, they had to go out every week of the 12, 13 weeks of the semester and tape record a game from the stadium, sitting in the stadium with the tape recorder in their lap and the information in hand and broadcast the game. And that I told them, I said, this is the hardest thing you'll ever do if you become a broadcaster. Nothing will be as hard as this, but this is where you're going to learn. So they did it, and some of them would just come back screaming bloody murder. It can't be done. It just can't be done. But they stay with it. And, I've got several of them who've done just spectacularly well, and others who are still broadcasting and doing very well. So, yeah, it was a wonderful thing. And there was a writer in Fort Worth who, I guess he'd gone to a game and saw one of the kids out in the stadium and talked to him and said that the Mercer Mafia is out every Friday night. If you have somebody with a tape recorder sitting in the stands with you, then that's he's one of the students. So the Mercer Mafia was all over 15 of them now every weekend learning how to do the game. But they learned how to do the game. And I critiqued every one of them. One of the things, and I'll critique you on this, do you ever say get in a broadcast?
Get or yet?
Get, G-E-T.
Yeah, probably far too many times, sure.
Yeah. I'm not trying to embarrass you.
No, not at all.
But it's the simplest word to forget about the rest of the language. In the first day of class, I would write that on the whiteboard and then run a red line through it and say, I don't want to ever hear any of you say this word again, because every time you say it, you're going to get a cut and grade. And I did that because one time I was listening to two very famous announcers. They used get 7 times, Joel, 7 times in one play. And I said, my God, you guys are making $1 million a game and you don't know the language. So that was my thing. Craig Way would say occasionally, he talked to me, he said, I said get on the air the other day and it turned cold.
What else would you listen for if you're critiquing students, or even if you listened back to your own stuff? What are the types of things that when you sit down to listen to a tape, be it of somebody else or of you, that irk you, that intrigue you, whatever it might be?
The word will go, will be, will score, will something, which is saying he's going to do it when? Tomorrow, this week, sometime. I mean, the guy is at second base or at first base. And there's a line drive into right field, base hit. The runner rounds second. He's going to third. He runs to third. He heads for third. It's not that he will go to third because he's on the way now. And so you don't use will. He will score. No, he's scoring. He comes around third, heads for the plate, slides in, he scores. You know, it's just will is not in a part of the action of right now in broadcasting the game. That's one of my pet peeves. And those would get high marks. Not finishing a play. Line drive right field, a base hit around second, and the runner around second, and then here comes the throw, and the batter stays at first base. What happened to the runner rounding second?
Yeah,
you got to finish that. Line drive into left field. So and so rounds second, head for third. Here comes the throw. Well, wait a minute. What happened out there? Here's the line drive into left field. That's a base hit. The left fielder Jones is running it down at the wall. The batter is heading for second. Here comes the throw in to third, and holding up with a double is Jones or Wilson. You know, the ball goes out. They come back to the batter. He's rounding first, heading for second. Go back to the outfield. The outfielder picks up the ball. Is he going to throw to second or is he going to throw to third? He looks and he throws to third because the guy's already at second base. You see, in and out and calling the people who are handling the ball in that same place so that everybody knows what's going on. It's just a little thing, and you slow down a little bit. You know, you don't have to be right on top of it but you want to get the whole picture. The ball just doesn't go into left field and die. The ball goes out there and the outfielder picks it up, throws it into second, and the runner stops at first. Just very simple little things, and it doesn't take any time. You know, same way with the double play. Ground ball to short. Wilson gloves it, throws to second for 1, back to first, double play. Just very simple, but they see everything that happens. So, and the same thing in football. If you don't finish a play or you don't give the score, it always was puzzling to me. Or first down. Here's a pass downfield to the 25-yard line. It's caught, and he's down. Well, what happened? It's first down, or it's third down and 4. You just have to finish the play and give the end. And if it's a first down, then you give the score. As I said, every first down you give the score. And that means the guy just made a first down. So now the score is this. And they're at the opponent's 25-yard line. So you see what the situation is. The situation. And that's what we worked on all the time. Finishing the plays. Keeping the play going. Not using get, not using will. They're running to third. They're racing to third. They're flying to third. They're on their way to third. All those things better than he will go to third. Oh, boy, that's nothing.
That's Bill Mercer, our guest this week on Play-by-Playcast. Get rid of the word gets. Gets is out. Done. And this goes back, it had been on my radar, as I said in the open, for the longest time to start expanding on my vocabulary and start figuring out different ways to describe different things. That was, I kind of predetermined months ago that that's what I was going to do. And, talking, as I said, with Jesse Goldberg-Strassler on the podcast kind of brought that to the forefront again in my mind. But what really pushed me, why this week did I start going to really dive into it? Part of it was I've got more free time now, but part of it, too, was I talked to Bill Mercer last week. And he said, eliminate the word gets from my vocabulary. And I was like, well, what am I supposed to say when he gets a first down? Well, that's the thing. Be a master of your craft. Understand the language and find some other way to say he gets a first down. He gets buckets. He gets a base hit. He gets the third strike call. It's a word we use so often that it's not lazy, but it's one of the easiest areas you can go to be more explanatory, to be more accurate, to be more colorful, and to help craft and sew a better product. So gets, it's out. That's what Bill left us with, and that's what I will leave you with here today as well. It was awesome to talk to Bill Mercer. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. We went about an hour, so thank you for sticking around and listening to it all. It was awesome. It was cool, and my sincere appreciation to Bill, as I say many times on this podcast, for people to take a flyer and record a podcast, take an hour of their day with somebody they do not know to talk about their lives, their careers, and their crafts. Many thanks to Bill Mercer for being a guest here on Play-by-Playcast. They are playing the music, though, so that's the go-home cue. We got to get up on out of here. We'll talk to you next Friday morning. Another episode of PXPcast is coming your way. See you.
And that will do it from St. Louis, where the score is inconclusive.